My name is Grayson from Toniq Labs. Thank you for joining us. A lot of people from the community know about you. You're an OG. You've been here since day one. So all in all, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you today.
So you're from Texas. Texas is a big state. I believe it's the second biggest state in the US, both by population and area. It's known for its barbecue, live music, hot temperature, and much more. There's a famous saying that everything is bigger in Texas. For you, Lightning, how has the culture of Texas influenced you? What are some things you like about living there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, like you said, Texas is a big state. So I don't want to speak for all of Texas. So I grew up in the northeast part of Texas in Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is kind of like a big melting pot of different, and I grew up in the mid cities and went to school in the mid cities there, right between the two cities. So it's kind of a melting pot of all different like ethnicities and nationalities. My high school, when you walk in, had a big flag of all the different nationalities that we had at the school, from all the different students. So one thing I really enjoyed about growing up in that area is that I got to meet a lot of different people, and experience different kinds of cultures through my friends and their families when I go over their houses and stuff like that. And it's probably not something I appreciated as much at that age, but looking back on it, I do now, because it definitely gave me different perspectives that, not everybody thinks and does things the same, right? So I learned that kind of early on. So that definitely kind of impacted my long-term, development. In terms of like Texas as a state, high level, I think something I could say that probably is true for most native Texans. The one thing I really liked about it is that, it kind of, the people here are those kind of people that, they all kind of stick to themselves, right? They keep to themselves. It's very family oriented, and they're not going to go bother you or test you. But at the same time, like if you fall, they're the type of people that come up, pick you up, dust the dirt off your shoulders, give you a head nod, make sure you're okay, and then they walk away, right? Like they don't overextend anything. They don't try to help you too much. They don't try to ask for anything in return, but they'll help you get back on your feet and give you another shot, kind of thing. So that's kind of something I think that is prevalent here in the state.
Yeah, that is awesome. Because I believe I told you already, my brother, he lived in the Fort Worth area as well, Forney,
Yeah.
to be exact.
Yeah.
So there's not too many mountains, right? Mostly flat-hilled.
Yeah, so it's pretty flat
land.
actually up here, and it's funny because I made the comment that I don't want to speak for the rest of Texas. So part of later on in life, I had a friend, and I made a comment that Texas is so flat, and he's from El Paso and stuff, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And so I try not to speak for the whole state because I haven't been around the whole state. So
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, Lightning, he has a lot on his plate. He's working double time at work. Plus, they're in the process of buying a dog. He's a husband, a father of 2 children. So you definitely have a lot going on. Plus, you're looking to buy a new home, correct?
Yeah, we're in the process of trying to figure out how we're going to go about selling, moving into a rental, and then building a new one. So we got all that going on.
Plus, he is extremely prominent in the IC community. So definitely a lot on your plate. Grateful that you're able to do this interview with us. LightningLad was also in the Air Force, a branch of service in the US military, specializing in tasks like flight line maintenance and electronic warfare. How did your time serving shape who you are? How did this open the door for future opportunities?
Yeah, so how did it shape? So I would say that the one thing I got out of being in the Air Force, one of many things, was an appreciation for, I guess, structure and process. And that sounds, it might sound negative to some people, but I guess to add on to that, it's really how efficient, a good solid process and structure can make things. I was in flight line maintenance, and when you're in flight line maintenance, for the most part, everything is kind of laid out for you. You have different tech data and stuff that tells you how to do things. And you realize that there's a purpose behind that, right? Because things have to be done in an exact way to keep things moving forward efficiently, right? And when you don't do things a certain way, it opens up risk for opportunity, or opportunity for risk. And so it just really kind of made me understand that, having an order to things will help you move forward in life, right? And breaking things down into individual tasks. so I did electronic warfare. So people don't know, electronic warfare is basically exploitation of the electromagnetic spectrum. And really, to put that in layman's terms, is if you think about all the things that we broadcast over the air, right, whether it be radio waves, heat signatures, stuff like that, it's all out there for anybody to kind of, manipulate, right? So you have electronic attack, which could be like jamming you hear about. And that's basically where somebody does like a broad, the very powerful transmission to where you can't hear anything else. Any other signals can't be collected. There's defensive electronic warfare, and then there's also support, which could be more like reconnaissance and stuff like that. And I mainly worked in the support area, so it had to do a lot with collecting all the data that was being transmitted out there and working through it, filtering through it, and seeing what kind of information you can glean from it, right? So it's kind of just all exploitation of that. So that kind of opened the door to getting to where I am today, which is really focused on cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is very much, it's got a lot of synergy with electronic warfare, and that it's kind of studying how people exploit, the open communication standards of the internet, right? Data is just free flowing for the most part. And how can people take advantage of that? How can people take advantage of open interfaces and stuff like that to manipulate how an application works, right? Kind of that really opened the door to where I am today.
Wow, yeah, that's intense. You definitely have a specialized skill set that not too many people know about. In terms of electronic warfare, that reminds me of at the beginning of the first Transformers movie. Do you remember that, where
where
the radio
where
signals
the
were getting
Decepticon
interfered?
Yeah, and he was jamming their comms, and the guy came in. Yeah. I'm a big nerd, so I'm trying not to nerd out about Transformers right now. So
yeah, so in essence, is that electronic warfare when all of those signals get interrupted or when they're trying to cipher those messages?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would fall under there's like three big major tenets of electronic warfare. There's electronic attack, where you're basically exploiting the electromagnetic spectrum to attack somebody. So in that case, that would be kind of what that is. They're attacking their sensors, their ability to communicate. There's electronic protection, which is another field that you get into. And then there's electronic support, which, like I said, includes intelligence gathering. So that would fall under the attack spectrum, right? Somebody's actively manipulating the EM spectrum to kind of block your signals and keep you from communicating.
But you personally, you're a big fan of Transformers then?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the movies. I like Pacific Rim. I like any sort of, I was real big into Gundam Wing when I was younger watching Toonami, right? You got Gundam Wing and all those things. And so that really introduced me to mechs and stuff. So any sort of like mechanized robot kind of thing is like right up my alley. So, yeah.
Well, Lightning, that makes sense that you're a big fan of poked studio bots.
Yeah.
The dots are finally connecting. Also, shout out to you, because Lightning, he is a big fan of video games, more importantly, good storytelling. So books, TV, movies, ultimately character development, which is what Poked Studio Bots is trying to do, is develop the NFTs, develop it into an animation series, possible video game series down the road. So I know you personally are a big fan of character development, and that's kind of what your pride and joy is a lot of the times, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's super important. I think if anybody asked me what kind of NFTs are you into, I would say stuff that I can identify with. Right. I don't really, and there's nothing against them. It's just my personal preferences, but something like, oh man, I hate to say anything because I don't want to upset anybody. So, but it's very successful, and they know I appreciate them, hopefully. But like BTC Flower, right? Beautiful works of art, right? Not going to deny that at all. Huge success, well deserved. I don't identify with the flowers, right? When I see that, I guess I'm much more along the lines of more like a PFP kind of collection, right? Where it's something that has some sort of character behind it, some uniqueness to itself, right? It's got a super great message. Totally appreciate that. But it didn't do it for me quite like the poke bots, where I could actually look at it and I asked myself, what is the story of this robot, right? And I did this contest, and Ben Reed came back, Wendy Van Pop on Twitter came back with some really great stories, and so did ICP Jesse and James 9, who I still owe y'all getting those stories out. And I'm so sorry. I'll get back to it. I promise. But that it's just, you give people this one robot and you say, hey, give me a story. And then people go and do this awesome storytelling and this development of who this character is. And that's just one character in this entire collection, right? And so that's why I love the Pokebot so much, because each robot could easily be his or her own story. And then that universe that can expand around that. So
I mean, it definitely expands the universe, right? When you think of it that way, where each bot is unique, it has its own story. Doesn't matter if it's number 8,239 or
right.
number 2,354, right? They're all so unique. They look different.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, like, and I was a big, I wasn't around for like Vanilla WoW when it came out, but I started playing a little bit with Wrath of Lich King was when my dad really started letting me play. And when I started playing those games, man, I don't know, for those people who are unaware, World of Warcraft or Warcraft in general just has such a deep lore to it, so much storytelling behind it, that I really got into the books and everything. And they get into the nooks and crannies of characters that you wouldn't even guess, playing the video game, right? So there's just these massive universes that can be created from even just the smallest little character.
Yeah, I love that. And then when that development happens, you could then use those characters' stories or the lore per se into other games too, like Hearthstone down the road, right? It's just an ever continuing expansion of this character development.
Right. And you already identify with it, right? Because you've already loved these characters. And so you get this new product that comes out, and people, it's like a brand, right, that you identify with. You're like, okay, I'm ready to go, right? It's already very compelling. So part of me personally, part of my approach with investing so much in the Poke Studio, besides the fact that I just love the art and I love John's work, and the characters he creates, is just and this is all speculation on my part, but just the possibilities of where it could go, right? Just not only that brand, but those characters, right? And being able to own that character, right? And seeing where it goes. Of course, he's not made any of these promises, and I don't expect him or his team to, but it's just the thought that could be what develops in the future. That's why I have so much, I'm willing to put so much behind it.
Yeah, understandably, that makes sense. That's exciting to hear. So going back to a little bit more about your life, you finished up with the military. Were you pursuing higher education after the military, or was it during?
Yeah, so it was the last 2 years. So I had just put on my staff sergeant stripes, and I had like 2 years left in my enlistment. And I realized that, if I really wanted to give my family the kind of life that I wanted to, unfortunately, being in the military is obviously a sacrifice on different levels, right? So, but when you have a family, you got to rethink things. And we wanted to have a second child and stuff. And so I was like, let me take some of my skills and get out, but I wanted to get out with a degree. And so I did some online schools the last 2 years in IT security, so that when I moved out, I could step out on the right foot. And so that's what I did the last 2 years while I was in.
Nice. Well, yeah, congratulations on that. I know that's a big feat for a lot of people. You also received a master's degree in cybersecurity, correct?
Right. Yeah, I did that follow on after I kind of got into my career a couple of years. I went ahead and started that process and finished.
So overall, you have the knack for IT infrastructure, server clients, embedded systems, and much more. What was the pushing factor to learn this? I mean, how did these skills come in handy for you today?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I did more of EW, more electronic support type stuff with reconnaissance. So on the aircraft that I worked on, it was a heavy aircraft, which means obviously it's a big one, right? Not a fighter. It's more like a cargo type of airframe. But inside of that, basically, you have a bunch of workstations, user workstations, which you can think of, everybody can think of like desktop computers. Everybody had their own workstation. And then behind all of them was these server racks, right? And then also you get into some more of the single board computers, which is the embedded side of the house, the non-traditional IT, to where it wouldn't just be a server. It would be, I don't want to get too low level for you, but it's a different type of computer, right? You could probably Google embedded and you'd be able to understand it better than I can explain. But it was kind of a good hybrid architecture for that. And we had a lot of data storage and stuff like that. So I said, okay, what if I'm going to move out? I need to kind of take the skills I learned in the Air Force and move that into the real world. So that's kind of that progression I had into traditional IT. in doing that. And then again, the EW stuff just has so much synergy with security, right? You understand how people think about how to exploit something, right? And so you want to understand how to keep that from happening, how to defend against it. So that's kind of why I was like, well, IT security is just a good combo of both of those. So I'll just move into that.
I love that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how does your understanding of the traditional IT stack help you appreciate the internet computer even more?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say that my personal view on it, one of the things that really excited me about the internet computer is its ability to kind of like squash the IT stack. So working in cybersecurity in of itself is somewhat of a buzzword right now, right? You say cyber, and it's a lot like crypto. People just throw money at you. So when you're working for a company that develops products, you advertise yourself as a cyber product, and you want to make it as simple as, and I'm talking about just general right now, but people who produce products, any kind of IT product, they want to make it simple, and they say just buy our product, plug it in, your system's upgraded, and you got these new capabilities, right? But every time you do that, you're adding like another layer to the stack, right? And every time you're doing that, while you could even be adding a cybersecurity appliance to your stack, and you're still adding another level of trust that you have to have in that hardware or that software, that it was developed securely and it doesn't have any weaknesses. And we've been doing that for so long as a society and in the industry. It's just continuing to build this stack and introducing all these new interfaces to get exploited. And one of the things I liked about the computer is that it just squashed all that down, and it became native parts of the protocol, right? It's something Jordan Last likes to say a lot that I really love, is it's secure by default, right? It just is what it is. It's baked in security, right? Instead of being bolted on, it was designed from the ground up to be secure, at least in its communications. And that's what I really love about it, is its ability to kind of give us a way to start over the right way, squash this stack down a little bit and just start focusing on software development and building cool applications. Obviously, software needs to be designed and implemented securely, but being able to take your infrastructure and have it secure by default is extremely powerful.
How is the internet computer by default secure in its own way?
So so there's something to be said when you have like a enterprise organization, for example, that stands up its own data center, its own IT infrastructure and its servers. They have to basically, kind of deploy their own certificate hierarchy, their own public key infrastructure. And then you kind of have to enroll that with something else. Like this is where I will go ahead and I want to put a disclaimer out there that I have a background in IT, right? Or I have an education in IT, traditional IT, but I do a lot more work in isolated embedded systems. So I'm sure that people like Jordan or something could give a better explanation of web security, but I'm just going to give my, understanding of it, because I don't really work a lot in enterprise IT. I work a lot more in real-time embedded systems, like specific products. An enterprise might build up their infrastructure, but how do they necessarily communicate in a trusted, secure way with another enterprise, right? Over the internet. And they do that through basically registering keys with certificate authorities, right? And then they have records like DNS records that they have to trust. But there's all this implicit trust there. You have to trust your DNS provider. You have to trust your certificate authority, which at the end of the day is still a human registering something. Or even if it's a system that provides an automated way to basically register your certificate, somebody's maintaining that on the back end, right? Somebody has access to those records, somebody can manipulate it. So there's somebody that could do these things, and you're trusting that they're providing the security that you want. And the way in the internet computer, how everything's kind of just baked in, and you have replicas that run geographically dispersed around the world, somebody could have access to it, but it would take a lot more effort to manipulate those records. And then you already have people like Jordan offering up things like node shuffling and trusted execution environments to kind of give you that confidentiality for your processes. All of these things being baked in to the point where a software developer, somebody who wants to build a product, no longer necessarily has to think about these things, think about standing up this infrastructure or how they're going to, maintain this infrastructure. They can just build software and deploy it, and know that all of this trust, all of this extension of trust between applications is there, right? They know if they're going to go talk to this canister ID, that they can authenticate that that canister is the one replying back to them. And that's all it takes, right? They don't have to set up all of this infrastructure and these trust agreements between enterprises and organizations. It's all just native there. And that's super powerful.
Wow, that makes a lot more sense for me. They could just solely focus on their product or the software that they are trying to develop and not have to worry about that back end, more or less, right?
Right.
For you, Lightning, how did you first hear about the Dfinity Foundation and the public blockchain network, the IC, they were developing?
Yeah, so oddly enough, I tell other people when they ask me this, I didn't even understand that it was a blockchain when I first heard about it. Funny enough, I was on LinkedIn, and I follow several different people on LinkedIn. One of them was the chief software officer at the time of the Air Force. And he talks a lot about zero trust architecture, right? Basically to the point where, today you have a lot of, I try not to get too technical here, I'm sorry, but you have different, again, organizations have their boundaries. If you think about like, this is my circle of trust, right? And so there's a boundary or a circle drawn around that, a line drawn around that circle of trust, and says everything outside of this, I'm not going to trust, but anything inside of it, I do trust, right? And the problem that we're running into more and more in the cybersecurity world is that you can't necessarily make that assumption that you can trust things inside your boundary, right? By default, just because they're inside your boundary doesn't mean they're trustworthy. So he's pushing this zero trust architecture basically to where everything authenticates with each other all the time, right? Which now in hindsight sounds a lot like the internet computer. So what had happened is I had seen him preaching this zero trust architecture online, and somebody commented, hey, had you heard about this thing called Dfinity? Right? And they just provided a link. And I followed that link, and I remember reading, and I'm like, man, this sounds really cool. And I remember watching the demonstration that they were giving at Davos when I think it was Dom, I can't recall, but he was on stage and he's like, look, I'm going to go push this application, and then it's just running. And I think it was like Can or something. And I was like, man, that's crazy. How is he doing this? And then, of course, in my head, because I didn't understand blockchain at the time or what it offered, I was like, man, this is going to get taken advantage of so much. Somebody somewhere is going to build out all the servers behind this and own everything. And then it wasn't until 2 years later at Genesis, when they started revealing the documentation, that I was like, oh man, this is a blockchain. What does that mean? And so I ended up reading like 5 different books on blockchain. One of them being one I love. It's called The Basics of Bitcoin and Blockchain. But it really just kind of gives you the understanding of like what blockchain is trying to do and how you have decentralization, what it's trying to work for, right? So anyways, that's how I heard about it the first time. It was indirectly.
I think that's the coolest introductory story I have ever heard. That is so real. I mean, that's such real curiosity, especially following that Dfinity link from LinkedIn. I'm happy you're here and that you're contributing so much. I love that. So down the road, right, because Dfinity is still building out so much for the community, what part of the Internet Computer's post-Genesis R&D roadmap are you most excited about?
Personally, probably the post-quantum cryptography, simply because at work I had to do a part of a study at once to understand what kind of exposure our systems have to it. I'm most interested in seeing how Dfinity, with their amazing team of cryptographers, defines the problem, right? Like how they see the quantum threat and how they believe that they can address it, right? So I'm kind of just the nerd that just wants to read the papers about how they talk about it. So that's really what I'm looking forward to, is what is their approach to addressing a post-quantum world, and what does that look like, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to most.
And I believe so far that's the very last piece of their roadmap, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
On that one specifically, I'm not expecting anything too soon, right? To me personally, it seems kind of aggressive that they're planning on doing it next year, right? I was kind of blown away when I saw that, but I'm totally looking forward to it if that's the case. If they do that, I'm going to be super happy.
Because I think that was what, 2023 onward?
Yeah. It was like Q1 onward of the next year.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot to look forward to, especially Ethereum, Bitcoin integrations. That's right around the corner.
Yeah, and then the Ethereum, the smart contracts, right? For one, being able to move Ether around, but the fact that you can actually call smart contracts and have that sort of interoperability, I'm really looking forward to see what some of these really cool software developers do with that, right? When you think about different trust guarantees or security guarantees that the networks provide, I'm really interested to see how these developers split their backend logic and what they do on the IC versus what they put on Ethereum, right? For different security reasons. So that'll be really fun to watch.
Let's transition into NFTs, right? Because I feel like you're one of the NFT kings on Twitter. Both you and I personally have a lot of NFTs, IC NFTs to be exact. So on Twitter, you commonly share NFT announcements and giveaways. What is it about them that intrigues you?
A lot of what we said earlier about, can I identify with it or not, right? That really gets me. Is there a story behind it? Can I see a future story behind it? The utility gets me a lot. I really like NFTs that offer utility. So those intrigue me. I think we have a handful maybe of really good art NFTs. Obviously things like Poked and Ludo and his work is great. Those intrigue me. I guess I just really like the idea of supporting the community because again, having been here since the beginning, I've kind of grown fond of just our collective effort to survive and how resilient this community is. And I just like supporting people that are trying to build on the internet computer, right? So that's really what my objective is when I'm on Twitter trying to share these things, is just say, hey, here's this team. I think they're doing a cool thing. And that's usually how my first tweet will start. And then I'll watch the team. And if they release something new that I think is kind of innovative or different, I'll start adding more context about what my latest thoughts are on it. But just generally speaking, I just want to show support for the community because we've all been through so much with the last year. And I'm just happy to see anybody building on the IC and want to make sure I'm giving them the kind of exposure, at least what I can with my following that I have.
I have noticed that about you. You're not so much worried about the price, but more so supporting that person / project.
Right.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Especially if you're encouraging software developers to deploy and to build on the IC. It's that bigger picture you're looking to achieve.
Yeah. Oh, and it's also the fact that I think just with, again, I'm only a year into this, but when I tend to get into things, I tend to go overboard on the research at first, right? So when I was just learning about what is the ethos with blockchain decentralization, what are we trying to do here? A lot of it seemed to focus on community and creating these communities and helping each other in these communities. It's important to me to feel like I'm doing that. And I think there's so much power behind what like Entrepreneurs doing or crowdfund NFT to where we can get together and give our little piece, but collectively we're helping a whole project come to life, right? And in return, that project is giving us something that we can track that not only says, hey, you're a member, but in the future, we're going to remember you. You have early contributor rights, basically, right? You never know what's going to come later on. Some people publish roadmaps and whatnot, but it's just that fact that, remember me later. I help you now, remember me later kind of relationship. And that's all I really expect from most projects that I buy into, right? I mean, it's great. Don't get me wrong. I try to make money like everybody else. So if the sale price shoots up, floor price shoots up, that's great. But realistically, my time horizon is very long and I'm just trying to be here helping the community.
I love that long-term perspective you have. So what about rug pulls? Obviously, rug pulls are the devil.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, rug pulls, it just means that the development team can suddenly abandon a project and then you're left with, in essence, worthless assets or NFTs that really have no utility. For you, Lightning, what does a proper framework look like to you in terms of supporting a legitimate project? Do you have a framework you go off of?
Like I said before, I think typically what I do is if I see a new project, I'll just try to share it right initially. And I'll start keeping a mental record of what I see come across as they reveal more, right, about what their plans are. That's when I start kind of like building my own value kind of structure of how am I valuing this thing. So if a project comes out and says, hey, I'm going to try to come up with an animal that I don't think exists yet. Let's say I see, chinchillas, right? They have a project and we're IC chinchillas and here's our example. I'm like, okay, cool. You're doing a fun little NFT, right? I'm already thinking, okay, low price, because that's just my default valuing of this, right? And if I don't hear anything more from them by the time they mint, I would expect a really low price, right? And my first red flag is if you haven't announced any sort of roadmap and you've done nothing else than just broadcast whitelisting advertisements and stuff, that's where my expectation of value is pretty low. It's like, okay, cool. You're just trying to share some cool little NFT art then you should kind of respect the community and not ask for much, right? But if I see a project, like I'll use ICemoji because I think most people who follow me know that I'm really into that one. Josh did some great pixel emojis very early on for the internet computer. And he didn't ask for anything other than saying, here they are. And I think they were like half an ICP, and we all bought in, and it was low supply. And that was it. But then later on, I mean, he stuck with it. He came out with a roadmap. He delivered with his roadmap. And then in addition to that, he built a game. I mean, he just announced out of nowhere that he was going to build a game, and he delivered on the game. And, you know, you look at a team and they just deliver and they deliver and they deliver. Man, that to me is like right up there in my books. It's like, I can trust you. The hardest thing in the NFT community to do is build trust. And so I always look for those people that deliver on their roadmaps. And if you're part of a community that doesn't deliver on your roadmap, or, you know, you should really just start thinking about how you value these NFTs that you're buying, right? A lot of times there's collections that I'll buy one or two of just to support. And then there's collections like ICemojis where I just spend all my money, you know? So, and I did the same thing with Pokebots at the time. I think everybody's got to come up with their own framework ahead of time to say, hey, what's going to be my process for valuing this project or any project? And then just follow that process, right? Refine that process and repeat it. And really try not to FOMO. And if you don't like a project, but you think everybody else does, and you're really only buying it because you think that you're going to make money off it, I really would caution you against that. Unless you truly like a project, I would not buy into it. That is just my default. Even with like BTC flower, something people may not know about me, I got like one of the top 3 rarest BTC flowers when the seeds hatched, but I sold it at a good price. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's going to go up. It's going to go up. And I said, that's fine. But to be honest with you, I have a hard time holding on to this because I'm not really passionate about it. And there are other people that are. So I'm going to sell this at this price, be happy with what I got, and somebody else can go really enjoy that flower. And I think that's exactly what happened, right? And I have no regrets because I knew that that was something that I wasn't really passionate about. So if you're going to get into NFTs or any sort of project, you got to have that passion for it. You'll have a lot less regret and a lot less sadness afterwards if things don't work out.
I love that. I think that's healthy philosophy to live by because you're satisfied by the NFT you have and you're not so much worried about the price, but the NFT itself.
Right.
That makes sense. Were ICemojis your first NFTs that you obtained on chain?
No, absolutely not. Tip jar, man. Chronics.
That's I'm sure you and Bob can relate. I know Bob definitely took advantage of the tip jar.
Oh yeah. Oh man,
the OG supporters.
I had the very first spinner. I got the very first spinner. Yeah, the blue spinner. I actually minted that. And, you know, I'm going to share this story. At the time, you know, first NFT, I put in my NNS wallet, right, in the tip jar. I didn't put in a Stoic wallet. I didn't realize that it was going to send it to the NNS, which obviously doesn't have NFT integration, EXT standard integration. And so I lost it. And I was so sad for so long. But thankfully, this was like kind of so early on. And Toniq was such like a leader in the space and NFTs at the time that they were like, we still have the ability to move this, right? Because we're testing things out. So Stephen was able to save it for me and move it to my wallet. I was so upset. I was like, oh man, I got this thing. And then I lost it to the NNS. How do I get this? It was a funny experience. And the thing I loved about TipJar was it was kind of like everything I believed blockchain was. And then it was my introduction to NFTs. And it was like, hey, here's this way we could support Toniq Labs. And this was like one of the first builder dev teams on the IC that were doing something that I could see. And I was like, I want them to go forward. I want to support them with everything I have because I love what they're doing, right? And so NFTs was like just that first like embodiment of what I believe blockchain should be, of community support and funding these projects, right? So I love the tip jar. That was a great memory. And I'll take that with me for decades to come. When the IC blows up into something amazing, I'd be like, I was there for Toniq Labs tip jar.
That's OG status right there. In fact, I first got into IC NFTs, I believe it was August of 2021. So a little bit later after the tip jar. But that was my entry point personally. So I missed the tip jar, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. So I'm not going to lie. I made the mistake. At one point, I was trying to make a move like, you know, everybody does early on when they figure out how to invest. And I basically sold off my Chronics, trying to move money around. I think part of it was to get ready and poked, thinking I would go back and like get more. And then they just took off. Liz had just done a conference and she showed off necrotic critters. And I think like that night they went up to like 25i or something like that. It was just stupid. And I got priced out and I've just never been able to like get back in. So that's one regret I have.
That's awesome. Lightning, before we log off, I do want to mention a project that you're working on. It's called the Lightning Rod, which I personally think is a brilliant name. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a personal project, and I hope nobody gets too excited about it because I got, like you said in the beginning, I got a lot going on, so I'm trying to work on it as I can. But the inspiration behind it was that a lot of times I'm moving very quickly. Like I check Twitter on my 5-minute breaks between things, and I respond really quickly. And sometimes I find that I respond too quickly and I don't convey my message appropriately as clearly as I'd like. So the lightning rod in my mind is a place for me to kind of ground myself, take time to make posts about how I'm feeling about certain current events in the community and stuff, explain why I think the way I think. And so that's kind of be like my discharge section, right? And then I'm thinking I might have like a recharge section of this website where I just talk about fun things. Probably have a section where I just talk about hobbies and stuff outside of the internet computer. But it's really going to be like more of a personal like blog page. And then at some point I would like to get with somebody and figure out how I can maybe just drop some NFTs to people free. Obviously, I'm not trying to make anything off of it, but I would like to know who's visiting early on once that goes out. So I guess whenever it does come out in the future, I might have like some sort of login, and I'm hoping I can have some sort of tracking of who is logging in. And so one day I can give them this thing and know who are the people that were following me early on, right? And then and then wherever that goes, it goes somewhere, right? But that's kind of my hope for it, is that I can just have a place where I can share thoughts with friends, share my knowledge and my thoughts, and then other people can share their thoughts and knowledge with me, because I think one of the greatest gifts we can give to each other is perspective. I have my way and my view of the world, and I don't know how everybody else views it. So when somebody else shares their perspective with me, I always appreciate it. I may not always agree with it, but I always see it as kind of like a gift, because you don't have to share that knowledge with me, right? So that's just kind of my way of like, I'm hoping to engage with people more in a more constructive way than what I get on like Twitter.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, just being able to share knowledge with each other. So more or less, it would be for your fan base, right? Any followers or really
Yeah,
anyone
or
who's
anybody who
interested
just
in the
wants to.
IC.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also an experience. It's an opportunity for me to learn how the IC works, right? And build something on it and kind of carve out my own little corner of it.
Surprisingly, there are a ton of mon pop blogs that just get blown up, right? It could be related to anything, but I feel like it's more of an intimate setting where you can actually express true feelings that are above 300 characters.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, that would be exciting to be on the lookout for. So once again, guys, that will be called the Lightning Rod later down the road. So that's something fun to look forward to. And before we wrap up here, Lightning, if you can leave our audience with one piece of advice in any fashion, what would it be?
When you're in the crypto space, just, don't overextend yourself. Try to enjoy it. Try to see it for what it is you get to be early pioneers of a new, not even just industry, but the way the world works, right? Because I think it's going to be so much larger than any one industry. Definitely take part and invest in it if you choose to. This isn't financial advice, other than my only financial advice I will say I'll give is just don't overextend yourself, right? Make it to where you can have fun, right? And if things happen, make it to where you go, oh yeah, that happened, but I'm comfortable. I didn't do too much, right? Because really it can get really stressful really fast. And I tend to be somewhat of an empath in sorts. So when I see people's stories online on Twitter, I really feel for y'all. And I hate to see that. So please take care of yourselves and make sure that you're not overextending yourselves and giving yourself an opportunity to recover. That's all I can say.
That's awesome. Stay safe, everyone. Wag me.
Yeah, absolutely. Wag me.
All of this was such incredible information. I know it's going to be huge for the audience. We're grateful at Toniq for you to have come on here, to have spoken, to have given us tips, and just for us to get to know you personally more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, man. It's great to talk to you. Part of it, I was looking for an opportunity to maybe connect more with the community. And so you kind of came around at a perfect time. So this has just been a great experience. Hopefully we get to talk again sometime.